Forged secretly in mortuary archaeology's hottest furnace, it's Archaeodeath.
This is going to be exciting. My first live on my own, my first lone live. So let's just see how there's so many buttons to press. There's so much to control here. I'm just going to assume that you're watching and say hello, but I'm going to start off with the important starting point, which is I'm good 2 minutes ahead of time, but we've got some important things to get started with. I've been doing chat lives, actually discussing people with other people, but this one's going to be all by my lonesome, and I'm going to be talking to you about anything that comes up, mainly archaeology. But to help me along, I've got mead, Baldur's Mead. This is Lancashire Mead Company mead. It's Saturday night. It's the time for mead, and I've got a backup bottle if I get through this. And the main thing is that we're here to celebrate getting 14,000 followers, which is a lot for me. I can't even imagine 14,000 people. So I'm just trying to get my head around that. So I thought I'd do a live and just, so here's the mead. This is the last of the Baldur's Mead. I didn't drink all of that in today, but that's from last week. I've got my glass claw beaker, which has appeared in a few of my TikToks, which is a replica 6th century Kentish or Rhenish bizarre looking beast of a glass vessel. This is a replica, obviously, but it's these things are known from the very end of the Roman period through to the early Anglo-Saxon period, sort of 4th to 6th centuries. Some of the latest ones are found in 7th century graves, are really tall, crazy things. But mead needs to be consumed. So, what are we going to talk about? Oh yeah, also another star of some of my recent TikToks. We've got little Grogu here, who's not irrelevant because, as you'll know, I do some posts on the archaeology of the Mandalorian. So how archaeology, how material cultures, architectures and landscapes appear in the show and their histories. So that little Grogu is an integral part of the whole thing. Now, I've seen various people do these lives. I've seen people talk. I see people sitting there posing. And I see people just saying thank you and answering questions. What I'm going to do, this is the academic version. I'm a professor of archaeology. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to ramble. I'm going to tell you some things about what I'm up to, what I do, and just drink mead and see how it goes, and until I get bored or you get bored, and so on. So to first start with, so I joined TikTok in May 2020. Previous to that, through the emergency of the lockdown, I joined YouTube and started doing videos on there. So I've got Archaeodeath on YouTube, Archaeodeath on TikTok. All happened with the lockdown, really. And in addition to that, I really built on my WordPress blog, which has been going since 2013. And blogs are old-fashioned now, but actually it's still a really useful resource to be able to write longhand, short little posts with pictures, longer posts with links to videos and so on, where you can discuss aspects of my academic work and how it links to public engagement on themes of places I've been, museum displays, archaeological research I'm doing. And I thought, let's try this TikTok malarkey out. Let's see what it's all about. And, I was encouraged to do this by a great friend of mine who is finishing her PhD on medieval archaeology. And she said, you should try out TikTok, Howard. And I thought, yeah, well, we'll see how that goes. And yeah, it's going all right. And now I think, it's difficult to gauge, isn't it? There's some people on here with millions of followers. How does that happen? Standing around dancing, I guess, and things like that. But, there's also educators trying it out and trying to communicate, trying to give a bit of information, trying to stay out of some of the controversies. But, it's inevitable that you end up disagreeing with people. But, almost 22 months on here and getting sort of various ideas across about my research, current debates, current ideas, and, just trying to keep it going. And one thing I would say about this whole, I haven't done much lives, and I'm still a bit confused by all the buttons and what's coming up on the bottom here, and there's various things going on. Hello, good evening. Hey, good to see you. And, but it seems to be going all right. So what do 14,000 people even look like? I can't even imagine. This is the bottom line, isn't it? Whatever, even if it was 100 followers, I never give a public talk to more than 50, 60 people. In a lecture theatre, I'm talking to 20, 30 people as undergraduates. When does an academic get to talk in a video that might reach, thousands of people? And that's what TikTok provides. I mean, you never know whether people are listening, but then I never know whether people are listening when I'm giving a talk in class. You never know whether people are getting the message or taking anything away with it. But then I'm never sure till they've written their essays whether students have. So for me, this is just another medium of getting into touch with people and discussing things. So there's all sorts of potential ways in which I can do this kind of thing and the type of information I can cover. But for me, it's really interesting to see how it's developing and the things that get interest, the things that don't. And you always feel a bit cheated with TikTok because some videos blow up for no good reason as far as I'm concerned. And you think, well, that's not something I put a lot of effort into and it doesn't really reflect what I do. But thousands of people have now viewed that. Oh dear. And other videos that you put a lot of effort in to construct some piece of information you think would be really interesting to people, and it goes to 100 people, and you go, oh well, never mind. But then again, that's so much of what we do as academics. You're never quite sure how it's going to be received and how it's going to come across. So the frustrations that many creators have with TikTok are actually really, for me, just the same as what I felt through my entire academic career. Is you're never sure how many people are going to read or listen to your publication, read your publications, listen to what you say in public venues. You're never quite sure whether people get your ideas or they misinterpret it, but that's true of everything. So for me, there's so many potential aspects to this kind of application for a bit of engagement. But in terms of general pieces of research, and pieces of teaching that I do, I think there's this, you never quite predict what people might find. So we've got questions already, important key questions about life and death, the human past, the human present, which football team do I support? I don't support a football team, why? Because I grew up in Reading. If you grew up in Reading, do I need to say anything else? I grew up in Reading, so I think that's one of the ways in which we can, just characterize that question. Another, the app is also doing weird things with telling me to do things. Another question: how many Viking burial mounds have been found in Britain? Yeah, it's a really interesting question because we have in the burial record of our early medieval Britain is the subject of my 2006 monograph, Death and Burial in Early Medieval Britain. We have lots of burial mounds from prehistory and from the Roman period. The Romans raised burial mounds too, remember, that are then reused in the early Middle Ages. We also have new burial mounds being raised over the dead as a sort of high status investment of burial. And the most famous of these are the late 6th, early 7th century princely burials, such as Taplow, Prittlewell, Mound 1 at Sutton Hoo, is the most famous of the Sutton Hoo burial mounds. But what happens after that? Well, conversion to Christianity, burial mounds go out of fashion, and burial with grave goods goes out of fashion. But we do have this little window in the late 9th century and early 10th century, where in parts of the British Isles we do see sort of Scandinavian influenced, rich burials, including burial mounds, and we find them on the Isle of Man. We have a few in Scotland, and we also have a few possible ones in Ireland. But in mainland Britain, the only one that we have conclusive evidence of a burial mound, well, there's a couple, are associated with the Viking Great Army's winter camp at Repton. And we have the Heath Wood Cremation Cemetery at Ingleby in the parish along, which is a short-lived cemetery where cremation, which was alien to the insular Anglo-Saxon population, was brought back and seems to be associated with the families and settlers who stayed around that area after the Great Army's departure. And the Western Mausoleum at Repton, which was a Christian semi-subterranean two-cell structure that was reconfigured into a pagan burial mound and used as a mass burial site for perhaps the war dead of the Viking Great Army. So in terms of mainland Britain, we have very few, and only a few, and where we can pinpoint them associated with particular groups of people, particular historical events, which is very cool, actually. But yeah, Repton and Ingleby, which is literally within visual interaction. It's up on the hill, just a parish along from Repton. Up in Orkney, yeah. So we do. I don't know as much about the Orkney archaeological evidence. It isn't mainland Britain, but it's part of the broader British Isles or North Atlantic archipelago. To not offend my Irish friends, we do have cemeteries with burial mounds and ship burials from the early Viking Age too, such as the Westness site, which is quite famous. So yeah, we do have quite a bit of evidence for a short-lived spate of furnished burial in northern England and in parts of the northern and western Isles of Scotland, where we have these furnished burials as part of the Viking diaspora, of influence of raiders, traders, settlers coming from Norse territories. Yeah. So let's see what other questions we've got here. Oh, they're coming thick and fast. Do you believe Ragnarok was made up by Christians? Oh, that's a good one. So the Viking end of the universe, end of the world, as portrayed. It's very tempting to see that you get debates raging from either end, seeing it as a kernel of ubiquitous pagan belief. It's what everyone thought, this Ragnarok is going to happen, or it's just basically a Norse retelling of Christian apocalyptic stories from Revelations. And that's really interesting because, of course, the thing I always say to people is there was never a time in the Viking period, from the 8th to early, end of the 11th, early 12th century, depending on how you frame it, when Scandinavia wasn't exposed to some form of Christianity. So you could make an argument that Ragnarok is completely a spin-off of Christian stories. I'm not expert enough to know really, but I think that's pushing it a bit. I think it's a bit, given the rich and varied different dimensions coming in there, I can't see it as a completely Christian rendition. No, there are parallels. Apocalypses are apocalypses, but I would still go for it being a reflection of a pre-Christian perception of the end of the world. And indeed, there has been the argument that's been raised quite recently. I'm not sure I totally believe this, but Bo Kraesland, who's a very antique but well-known and respected Swedish archaeologist, and another character called Neil Price have argued that the volcanic induced climate change of the early 6th century may have been one of the ideas that inspires the idea of that Ragnarok, the destruction of crops, the population, the starvation, the famine, the political chaos that may have been experienced in parts of Scandinavia, may have actually inspired some of those Ragnarok motifs. I don't know. Take it or leave it, but it's been published and it's in a peer-reviewed journal, so you can go and read that for yourself, so to speak. So what else can we talk about? Look at you go. So, yeah, hi Ash, how you doing? Talk about Anglo-Saxon burial sites. So I'll stay on the Vikings for now because I've been gassing a lot about Vikings. I'll come back to the Anglo-Saxons because they're my thing, really. What are you drinking? I'm drinking mead, mate. I've just finished off Balder's Mead, Lancashire Mead Company. Taste of the gods. Neil Price makes a compelling argument, you say. Yeah. I mean, it is an interesting theme. My cynicism in that whole argument comes down to not that there was a really dark and miserable time of climatic change, but how much it affected everyone everywhere in the same degree. And that's still a lot of debate about the extent of the impact of, that event. And that's an interesting point, the real Ivar, that, you can see Ragnarok as a philosophical, almost like the pagans seeing the end of their world coming. They see, change coming. I certainly think, what I always say with the Viking Age is there was no such thing as a single pure Christianity. There were Christianities, both Eastern, Western, and different versions being adopted in Scandinavia, but there were also paganisms. There was no single pagan way of looking at the world. There would have been probably a lot of regional and local variation, and people did construct their faith around their landscape and their experience. So I think your attitudes about where the dead reside, or how the world came into being, or where the world's going, were probably obviously shared ideas over a large cultural expanse as people traded and moved around. But I think there would have been a lot of local beliefs, and the paganism that you might recognise in Blekinge in southern Sweden would have been very different from the paganism of Iceland in the immediate conversion period. So I think we always have to remember that religion is a mess of both pagan and Christian. There would always been lots of ideas spinning around. I can't remember where the volcano was off the top of my head, but I don't think it's a European one. I don't think it's an Icelandic one. I think isn't it a Southeast Asian volcano? I'll have to double check, but I don't think the eruption, or is it Central American? I can't remember, but it's certainly not a European eruption. So let's see if there's any more Viking ones, and I'll skip back. I won't do them in order. I'll see if there's any more. Yeah, it may have been actually. It may have been a Java. I can't remember off the top of my head. Let me just check. I'm just to get my order right in terms of questions to answer. So I think there's a lot we can say about Viking society from archaeology in particular, and we shouldn't lose hope. There's a lot we can say. Just because we can't hear the voices, so to speak, just because we don't, the written words are so fragmentary from the Viking Age itself, either external sources or from later Viking Age runestones and a few poems and so on. They're very fragmentary sources, and it's easy to be frustrated and think, well, we can't get at these people, we can't access them, we can't talk to them. But frankly, I would push back and say, well, you could say that about most people who lived in the 19th century, Yeah, all right, we've got lots of more richer written sources for the 19th century, or even the early 20th century. We've got oral traditions, maybe you've got photography coming in, you've got art, so many different sources for understanding the 19th century. But people still lived their entire lives through the 19th century across the globe without touching the written record, without being mentioned in a written record, who maybe their name only appears when their land is dispossessed from them, or their family are put in a workhouse, or they're entered a debtor's court or something, and a name appears. Most people, there's a lot of people in very recent centuries where we have no direct image, let alone voice for those people. Yet we still do history, we still do archaeology. So when we're pushing that back to the Viking Age, my point is simple, is that it's very easy to lose heart and think, well, we're never going to get much more from the written sources, but we've got this increasing volume of archaeological evidence. We can't hear that the objects don't speak to us other than in a metaphorical way, but we still have so much positive we can say about these centuries, from the fragments of people's settlements, people's burial sites, and so on. So I think there's a real lot of positives, I would say, about archaeology and what it can tell us about the Viking Age. Even if we can't get inside people's minds, that's what I mean. Is we can still study the period. A time team. Well, I have never been on a time team. I've done 4 TV documentaries over my my academic career, which, depending on when you count it as a lecturer, I've been a lecturer over 20 years, man and boy. But as a PhD student, and as before that, a master's student, before that, an undergraduate student, it's almost 27 years, 28 years. If you put that all into context, you have this sense of, well, why am I not famous on Time Team? And do you know what? When Time Team was on first, I hated it. I absolutely hated it. Not because I didn't like the archaeologists, not because I was snooty about it being on TV and I knew how popular it was making the subject. I hated it because of the simple 3-day time frame, which was for me utterly counter to what we should be doing. It was utterly oppositional to what we as archaeologists do. We don't do things in 3 days. It's like it was a false, utterly false time ticking clock that made a mockery of the many, many days and weeks it takes to do post-excavation, months, years, the many, many weeks of preparation to do excavations, and it gives this idea that you just rock up, suddenly you've got all this tech, you've got a guy doing art, you've got a guy or a girl sitting with a computer screen reconstructing it all. You've got all these people suddenly come out of the woodwork. Every local is keen to do it. Every farmer is desperate for you to be there. If only, and suddenly for me, I thought that was just utterly cringe. But, equally I concede, it was a massive boon for us as archaeologists. So, but why haven't I not been on? But I'm not televisual enough, mate. Am I? I'm not televisual. I'm not pretty enough. And I never was young enough. Even when I was young, I didn't look young enough, if that makes sense. So no, I've never been a time team material, shall we say. And I talk too much, don't I? And I don't make it simple. I go, well, it's complicated, So if Tony Robinson was there going, well, what have you found? I say, well, it's interesting. And they go, right, get the camera off him. It would have never have worked. Time team would never work for me. But the documentaries, what's really funny is the documentaries I have done for TV have been not archaeology documentaries. One of them is history archaeology mashup. One's art history, one was history of religion, and one was a history again. So 2 history, 1 art history, and 1 history of religion, theology. In other words, what I found was really interesting was that people think I'm more of a wearing a jacket and standing in front of something old person rather than a trowel in hand type digger type archaeologist. I didn't fit the stereotype. And I think TV has its stereotypes of every discipline, doesn't it? And you end up finding, you don't fit the right look for a particular thing. So I think I talk too much, I don't say things as simple enough. And I don't think I look the right part for being on TV. But, that's all right. I don't want to do that. There's different ways we can engage communities. And being on TV, get to a massive audience, but you're only speaking for about 20 seconds. So, so I did one on the history of Welsh art last year and another one on the Vikings, Britain's Viking graveyard with Cat Jarman and various other people at Repton talking about the Vikings, actually. And that was good fun. But, it's not something I'm desperate to be on TV a lot. It's a bit weird, really. So thank you for those questions. Let me think what else. Have another look at what people have been writing lots of good questions here. So I'm not going to be involved in time team. And frankly, with the new time team, I think it's great that they're back, but they've got all the experts they need. I think I'd be a loose cannon. They'd probably have one of those moments, like one of these Hollywood films where they call me in and go, we gave you the script, Williams. You're not sticking to the script. You're either do what we say or you're out of here. And I'm not going to be forced to say this in front of the camera. I'll be out. I'm too much of a loose cannon, a wild card. No, I don't think I'll be on time team. They can stick it. Keep it. That's fine. I don't need to do that. So there's advice for people reconnecting while dealing with the fake Viking types that make us look bad, says Danish Bear. This is a big question, isn't it? Anyone that gets involved in any group, any interest group, whether it's model railways or, Vikings aren't the same as model railways, but I was just trying to think of some analogies, really. I got a lot of people upset for talking about football clubs in a video recently. Did you see that one? Vikings were like, going on playing football on a Sunday, and people got very angry about that. I didn't mean exactly like playing football on a Sunday, for crying out loud. There's less axes I see at football games, I imagine. But I was trying to make the point that Viking wasn't something you did from the age of 12 to the age of 90, and something like that. That's what I was trying to get at. It was a more infrequent activity. But anyway, my point is, whatever group you do, whatever enthusiasm you have, whether it's for bone china or it's archaeology, you'll find there are different reasons people are there, and there are tensions over why people are interested in that past. And I think we all know that the Viking theme and the early medieval theme more broadly attracts some very special characters and some very nasty characters, but it also attracts a lot of interest. And I've asked others how they deal with this as academics, how they deal with this as enthusiasts, how they deal with this as people with a personal faith, and they all have different answers. And our one level is to starve these jokers of oxygen and or just ignore them. But then it's about a balancing act of starving out and then calling it out, isn't it? It's that starve out, call out balance. And when do you call out the people who are peddling false information, dangerous narratives, and when do you just go, yeah, whatever? And I don't have an answer for that. But I would say you have to be true to why you're there and why you're doing what you're doing. And feel, it's that ongoing, oh God, a lot of people, like Ash was talking about this, it's an ongoing accountability, isn't it? If you're stopped in the street or stopped online at any one moment, can you say it's clear why you're doing what you're doing? Is there room for people to see you as one of those nasty types? And I think that's what we need to do. We can joke about our interests, we can laugh about our interests, we can use popular terms, but at the end of the day, we have to say, can you hand on heart say that people understand why you're doing what you're doing? So Danish Bear, I think, is that true to yourself and why you're doing it? And so people have your story. And there'll always be someone that takes one thing you say out of context and says, oh, you've done this wrong or you've got it wrong. And there'll always people who literally take a sentence out of context, whether it's on a TikTok live or it's in an article I've published. But I think the same goes for you, my friend, that, whatever you're doing, you've got to keep that integrity for what you're doing it rather than worry what other people are getting up to. Because it's lovely to be at 14k followers, but then I accidentally had a moment of depression the other day because I on my For You page came up someone spouting absolute horse manure about ancient camel art or something, and claiming there were ancient civilizations that existed long before the Ice Age. Real barking up, mad as a goose. Graham Hancock manure, and then you just skip onto the profile and you see 58,000 followers or whatever, and you suddenly your heart sinks and you think, well, why should I be doing this when there are people out there because they're prettier or more engaging or whatever, or they're higher quality production video, they've got a much higher, they've already got a lot of clout, and you think, well, what can I do about this? Do I shut up? Do I just go away? Do I go into a sulk and not do my thing? And you think, well, no. You've just got to keep going, haven't you? And even if because it's not about numbers, it's about the message and why you're doing it. So that's my only response to you, Danish Bear, is you've got to keep going, doing what you do for yourself, and so that and you have accountability for why you do it. That's my feeling. Hello, awesome human. Hello, Richborg 4.0. Keep going with your many accounts. 4.0. I hope it doesn't go up to 5.0. Nice to see you. You have to be multidisciplinary and comparative in your approaches. I don't know what that's in response to, but I think to everything, really. Absolutely. Good to see you. Lots of people saying hello. I think being a professor, though, it is a blessing and a curse, though. I was one of Britain's youngest archaeology professors. In the UK, archaeology, when I was appointed, that is not now, professor in the UK academic system is senior academic. So in the US, everybody's either assistant, associate professor or professor. But I was appointed full professor reasonably young. So I was about 35, which is about 10, 15 years earlier than most people. Oh, that pissed people off. But my point is, it's a blessing and a curse because it makes you sound like old news. There is that stuffy, mad professor, which I cultivate that as part of my image. But it is, my point is, it does have that old ideas, old stuffy, not changing. So actually, a lot of the time, TV people don't want that. They want the new, fresh ideas, and they assume it comes in a new face or with a young title. So it can be a blessing and a curse having those qualifications. Gosh, myths of giants. I have no freaking clue. One of the things I don't know about Norse mythology, and I don't know a lot about Norse mythology, is what people thought giants, dwarves, elves looked like. I've seen people talk about this on this app, and they have a lot better ideas than I have. But one thing I have learned from colleagues and history of religion people is there's very little actually linking our representations, our imaginations of what a frost giant looks like with what early medieval people thought. I have a feeling that they probably thought they all just looked like other people. I don't think they were particularly tall or short or different. Or they thought the gods and the giants were the same kind of thing. I don't know. There's people who know much more about that than I do. So I'll probably stop there. All I would say is that there's a famous piece of runic inscription from Scandinavia, the Ramsonsberget stone, which is supposed to show a bit of the story of the Volsunga saga, the Sigurd the Dragon Slayer slaying Fafnir. And it's got a the little figure representing Regin, the dwarf, who is the foster father of Sigurd, everyone goes, oh, you can tell it's Regin because he's got short legs. Because a dwarf would have short legs. But then you look at the representation of what is supposed to be Sigurd sticking his sword into the dragon, and he just looks exactly the same proportions. He looks like a meathead, a big Arnie kind of character, big muscles and tiny little legs, or Thrud the Barbarian, for those of you that know, remember that from back in the day. Sort of this massive, sort of cliched stereotype, sort of D&D type character, massive arms, tiny legs. And you think, well, is he a dwarf too? My point is, I think we read a lot into what we think Norse people envisage these other, species to look like. And we actually have no bloody clue. We have no clue, or very little clue, from the art, from the archaeology, because a lot of the figurines we have, they could be anything. People say, oh, is this a Valkyrie? Is this one of the Disir or whatever? And you go, is this Frey? Is this Thor? And you go, well, could be anyone really. Most of them. If it's got an eye missing, then you go, it's Odin. But beyond that, it's a bit dodgy. How doesn't this live have more viewers? Good question, Historical Heathen 2, and good to see you. I'm just catching up with everyone's comments. People interested in taking very as an active cultural lineage are often just okay. Well, there is a difficult. It is difficult to know people's motivations, isn't it, as to why people are interested in being, dressing up as Vikings. All I would say is I have some good friends who are diehard reenactors, living history people who have been doing this accurately and sincerely for over 2 decades, and they have the same problem. They see people rock up, but they're hyper pedantic. They go, this guy came along and he had a 7th century sword. Thought he was a Viking. That sword, the replica he was making it of, is from a grave from the Vendel period. We didn't have him in long. We told him where to go. And I thought, come on, relax, lad. It's not that serious. But apparently some groups get very, very passionate about their accuracy of their reconstruction. So cosplaying is often said as a mockery, and I don't think that's fair. But I think some people take it very seriously in terms of reconstructing historical costumes from archaeological evidence, from the hats to the shoes, the evidence we have from the organic preservation at Dublin and York and so on. So people do put a lot of effort into it. Yeah. Yeah, what is reconnecting though? does reconnecting meaning actually having to learn everything we know about the language? How much are we relaxed about this? This is a question I want to know. My closest my closest to reenactment is drinking out of a replica early medieval glass claw figurine, but no one's going to mistake me for an Anglo-Saxon, in this hoodie, are they? How serious do we have to be? And I suppose it depends on what you're trying to do. Are you trying to educate people? Are you trying to create a personal connection? Are you going to literally go and live in a longhouse and, slaughter your own pigs and farm grow your own crops? Occasionally go on a summer raid to IKEA. I don't know. It depends on, So I'm not judging. I honestly don't. I don't really mind. I think there's lots of ways. There's lots of ways people can do it without being a complete arsehole. And there's lots of ways to engage with the past without actually being a dodgy person. I think there is. It's just that we know that there is that dodgy element lurking in the wings everywhere. Okay, here we got some more really focused questions. What do you think happened to the Vikings at the Ridgeway Hill burial pit in Dorset? Oh yeah, I love that one. Thank you, Owen something. I don't know how you want to say that name. Thank you, Owen. That's a really good question. So this was a major find. The way I like to see the archaeological evidence for the Vikings in England is Saxons 2, Vikings 0. In other words, we have various bodies and bones around the place which we could speculate associated with Viking raids, but we have 2 big deposits, St John's College, Oxford, which has been associated with the Surprise Day massacre, and also a late 9th, early 10th century mass burial on Ridgeway Hill near Weymouth, on the Dorset Ridgeway, near Dorchester between Dorchester upon Thames and Weymouth. And this burial was phenomenal. It's found by Oxford Archaeology. They've done the full report, and what they found is, I can't remember off the top of my head, they found basically a carefully arranged pit, or carefully dumped set of bodies without heads, and then next to it, a pile of heads. Well, they didn't find the heads, they found the skulls, of course. And what it looks like is you've basically got a boatload, one sizable boat or 2 small boats, of Scandinavians, and we know they're Scandinavians because they did the isotope analysis to show that the individuals had grown up, some of them from beyond the Arctic Circle, but from various parts in Norway and Denmark, most likely. And they ended their lives somewhere in Dorset with their heads lopped off their shoulders and probably naked, having had their armour and clothes stripped from them. So this was basically this is why I say Saxons 2, Vikings 0 in terms of the archaeological evidence, because we have these two massacre deposits where clearly these individuals met a gruesome end, stripped of their clothing. If there were any women with them that had come with them from Scandinavia, they had a different fate that wasn't decapitation. If there were no women, it was just the men that was, it was only a male-only party that were, cornered, forced to surrender, or and dispatched in the most gruesome fashion. But rather than some crazed attack, it does seem to be that the Ridgeway burial shows a very systematic execution, and it's part of a broader pattern we have from other late Anglo-Saxon execution cemeteries of the deliberate public execution of individuals as a deterrent, but also to uphold the judicial political order, and also the religious conceptions, because you're basically, by burying people on boundaries of hundreds, on prominent locations, sticking their heads on spikes or hanging them and burying the bodies nearby, you are basically consigning people away from the consecrated ground. You're denying them a Christian burial. You're giving them a heathen burial. And in the place name, the charter evidence, these locations are called heathen burials, heathen burial. So you actually have locations in the charters called heathen burials. And people thought, people used to think that was referring to ancient old pagan Saxon burial sites that were still known in the 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th century. No. They mean people who are unknown to God, people outside of God's blessing, who are denied burial. And it's what you do to the executed victims of the late Anglo-Saxon period. So this Weymouth Ridgeway burial is exceptional because everyone's been killed in the same way in one event. But actually it fits into a broader pattern of what you did to what you did to anyone that was a bit naughty, stole cattle, did the wrong thing with the neighbour's daughter, or in this case, rocked up in a longboat or two and tried to have away with all the treasure from the nearest church. And so I think that's hopefully that's what to tell you what that was about. It wasn't just some crazed attack, it was a deliberate systematic execution. And indeed, when we talk about barbarity and violence in the early Middle Ages, we always waffle on about the Vikings being such badasses. Well, the most vicious evidence we have of violence and execution comes from the Anglo-Saxons. They're a real bunch of shits, to be honest, in colloquial terms, that is. So they were doing some real nasty stuff. Yeah, we need a bit more academic unity on this. And of course, the Viking world was all about trade as well as raiding. In fact, I think there's a lot of debates about why the Viking Age started, and I've steered clear of that question. People have asked me that in various ways, but there's a whole massive debate about why the Viking Age began in the, really in the 8th century. It's an 8th century beginnings now. And I think it's all about controlling and managing and accessing trade routes. And you do that through raiding as a secondary option when you have no other option. But I think it's really about trying to consolidate and build trading relationships. And by those that didn't have access to it, were felt being left out, resorting to raiding as an alternative way of getting into those trade networks. So thank you for congratulations. Thank you, non-crazy cat lady. Thank you very much for the and for the roses. And I'm catching up with lots of questions. There are lots of good questions here. So, I suppose my challenge with hello, little wag, hello, thank you for your kind comments over recent months. I suppose my point to say about the Viking and early Middle Ages more, and someone did ask me to talk about the Anglo-Saxons more, is that I came to this period interested in a fascinating period of early history where you have historical sources, place name evidence. You've got exciting archaeological evidence. It's not all about blood and violence and gore. A lot of it's about the church and settlement and linear earthworks and burials. There's all sorts of different things you can study in this period. And why I think it's so exciting is because it's a period where archaeology really, really makes a difference, where archaeology really adds something to the story. And it keeps doing it, because in the 20 years I've been teaching, my courses, every year I'm changing my lectures and adding new things and correcting things I said before. Sometimes I leave my lectures old-fashioned to see if anyone notices. Obviously, I don't believe what I teach, in the sense that I deliberately teach my students with different opinions that I don't necessarily are convinced by. And sometimes I take contrasting stances on issues to do with both what happened in the human past, but why the past matters today. So I do present them with some polemic. I say, well, the past doesn't matter. It's all dead and gone. Why does anyone care? And see what they say. So I do this. Sometimes it goes terribly wrong, and you realise the students harbour various opinions that you didn't think they would have, and you can be surprised. And sometimes it goes better than you think, and they sparks them to think in different ways. But whether it's online or with my students, it's always good to sort of be provocative, as long as you're not spinning sort of manure. The one thing that I must confess to, and I did leave a couple of people asked me about this Viking onion soup thing. I'm going to do a video about this, because I don't know much. Every academic, we have massive gaps, and I've seen all these dozens of videos about blimmin' Vikings and their onion soup, and I'd never really come across this piece of popular story. Did you know the Vikings used to make their warriors that were injured eat Viking soup, and if they smelt of onion, you knew they had an intestinal cut, or something like that. I thought, well, that sounds like totally made up. But actually, of course, there is a story behind it. It's not as presented, in my opinion, in these popular creator accounts. There is another story here. But I'm going to do posts on all sorts of things, depending on what people ask me about. I can't get to everyone, but I'm trying my best to answer questions. And another one, the Real Arva says about the wolf cross found in Iceland. That's something I got from Stefan's TikTok. I don't think that'd even hit my radar, I'm ashamed to say. In other words, I'm trying to be honest and say we all have gaps in our knowledge. And I saw his video and I thought, I'm not so sure about that. Is that so I'm going to do some research on that piece, actually. So I know that when I speak about it, I've done my research. I know a little bit. I mean, I can't, go off and spend days in the library just to research a TikTok video, but I do want to know a little bit about it before I comment on it. So, onion soup, I thought, wow, a load of rubbish. No, Viking warriors eating onion soup, what a load of bullshit. But my video about that will be, actually, yes, but no. There's a different angle I've got to it. Likewise, I bet when I do research on this wolf cross found in Iceland, I'll have a maybe, but also, what about this? But I'll refrain from answering about that. Oh yeah, I mean, in terms of Christianization, a question for Martin here. There's a massive difference in the archaeological record pre and post Christian conversion. And the way I pitch this is that, back in the day, it was seen an absolute stark divide. Christianity happened, within a generation, everyone's doing things differently. Then we went to people just continued on their traditional ways and gave a nod and a wink and a bit of extra tax to the church, and everything went on the same. And I think the way we're going back in early medieval Europe now is we're seeing that some periods and places there was a fundamental rapid shift, as we see in, say, colonial Africa, parts of colonial Africa, parts of India. It literally is a generation. The mission arrives with the power and authority and the bully boys to enforce it, and you're no longer using that temple, mate. You're no longer doing this with the dead, in terms of burial ritual. You can see a shift within a generation. In other places, though, it's centuries of slow change. So it really, my only answer is it depends where you're talking about, whether the religious conversion is militarily and externally imposed or is locally negotiated and worked out. So and you can see it, but either way, you can see it in the archaeological record, changes in burial practice, changes in settlement location sometimes, such, the church origins. We often just have, and we're having increasing evidence of the first phase. So Iceland is really interesting, because I've been reading all about the new settlements, church settlements we find in Iceland, which are, bringing us back to a view of really stark change in burial practice in the early 11th century with Christianization. So yeah, there are changes and shifts that are really quite stark in some places. Now, Rasmus is asking about what my thoughts on Greenland Norse in Jared Diamond's Collapse. I haven't read that book, but I can I know there is a huge debate about the reasons for the decline and abandonment of the Norse settlements, and I understand that other authors have moved back from this idea that the Norse were simply refused to adapt and couldn't adapt, and therefore were doomed. And it's like a moral lesson, in the same way that Rapa Nui used to be seen, Easter Island used to be seen as sort of a moral lesson of ecological collapse. This is what happens if you don't adapt. And I would say that the latest theory I understand about why the Norse Greenland settlements declined and were abandoned was not because of expanding Inuit. It wasn't because of failure to adapt. It was very successful colonies, settlements for centuries, but they were so dependent on the European walrus ivory trade that when elephant ivory became more accessible in the, don't quote me here, but 14th century, that thereabouts, then basically they had nothing that would their trade relied too heavily on that, and that they therefore couldn't continue. And the idea of some dramatic overnight collapse, I think, is quite, is no longer archaeologically evidenced. We've got, it's much more of a slow decline. And the thing that makes it eerie, people love it, captures the imagination, like the Mare Celeste. Where did they all go? Is the idea that there was no historical record, and people presumed the Greenlanders were still there, and that is bloody eerie. That is eerie that people, when the people still thought there were people there, and then came there and found there wasn't centuries later, and that does freak one out. But I think it's more of it's not as sinister or as simple as people have been claiming. I think it's more to do with long distance trade links. Or at least I think that's what Tom McGovern and others have been arguing over the last decade. Harsh weather conditions. Climatic change, would have been a key factor too. But yeah, so there's so many things that our research can reveal. How am I though? Upside down asks. Hello, yeah. Upside down, side to side, 88. Yes, how am I? I don't know. It's a weird world. I'm almost finishing my teaching for this academic year, I've got 2 more weeks of teaching. We're going on strike again. There's industrial action. I'm onto my new mead, just in case you want to know, the Jarl's mead. So cheers. I'm not going to go down the skull route because I know our Danish bear will get angry if I say it in any other context that isn't accurate. Oh, that's disgustingly good. Better than onion soup. But I think there is. I think it's a weird time of the year, really. It was only I'm coming up to the 1st of April, and this time last year I got a letter from my university at 5 p.m. just before I went on annual leave, 1st of April, saying that I was at risk of redundancy. So I'm kind of still in post-traumatic stress from 3 months of not knowing whether I had a job last year. But then I think, well, luckier than those poor employees of P&O Ferries that just got a video message telling they were sacked that day. Was that yesterday or the day before? Terrible. But I'm doing all right. I've got my mead. What more can you help? I'm enjoying the job, and keeping going with it. Where did the Greenlanders go? I think they either died off or went back to Iceland. Probably went back to Iceland. But again, the point is, why do we expect people to? What archaeological historical evidence do you expect to find of people abandoning a site? Just like we're not here anymore. People abandon sites all the time. The British landscape's full of literally thousands of medieval and early modern settlements have been abandoned, and we don't know hardly any of the exact reasons of when the last people were there. So yeah, Greenland's interesting, but do bear in mind, across Northern Europe, archaeology is all about abandoned sites, and we don't always know exactly why and when they were abandoned. So yeah, so that was an issue. Thank you for the sympathies there about the redundancies. Yeah, it's appropriate to say skull right now. Okay, cheers. Slange had a theory about North Greenland, but they went back. Yeah, Iceland. I think you've already said that. Yeah, I think you all agree with me. So yeah, we're striking again for overpay, working conditions, all the usual things. Yeah, but my little contribution is dressing up as a Dino Viking, which is all very silly, and but it gets the attention, and must annoy the senior management to see a senior professor dancing around in a blow up Viking costume, a dinosaur costume, and if that's an achievement in itself, really, isn't it? I get a pay cut because I take place in the strikes, but I get to dress like an arsehole outside and dressed up as a Viking for a time. So, a mash up dinosaur Viking. So it's all fun. Oh, right. That's a good point. I am a dino Viking. Yes. Bravo. Thank you. Thank you, Gene. Yeah. So, yes, it's a weird time of the year, really. I teach a sort of, undergraduates, which come in at 18, 19-year-olds, starting archaeology degrees or combined honours, history, archaeology, combined honours with a few other subjects. I then teach a sort of introductory course to the British Isles. I then teach second-year students a course called Empire and Aftermath, the end of the Roman Empire and what comes afterwards. I teach a course on the contemporary past. I teach about 20th and 21st century archaeology, everything from the archaeology of rubbish tips, settlements, the archaeology of the refugee crisis, and also contemporary cemeteries and burial sites as well. All sorts of things you didn't think you could do as an archaeologist. I do that. I teach a third year course on, guess what, Vikings, but I also have another third year module I teach every other year called Death and Burial, mortuary archaeology, how do we interpret funerary remains? And I teach on an MA called an MA Archaeology of Death and Memory, and the Archaeology of Death and Memory is a 1 year full-time MA, 2 year part-time, where students can do a very specialised course. There's no other course like it in the world. Actually, we're looking at archaeology and interdisciplinary approaches to death and commemoration. So it's a fun teaching job. I'm program lead the MRes Archaeology, which is our research masters in archaeology. Oh yeah, and yes, of course. And I also supervise 5 PhD students who are doing PhDs in archaeology on subjects ranging from mortuary archaeology in the media, which is an interesting media studies archaeology overlap subject, right the way through to students doing new investigations of early medieval artifacts from the Anglo-Welsh borders. So I get to supervise doctoral researchers are basically doing a whole PhD on their own chosen topic and developing their own interest in it. So you're really seeing the bright new ideas coming forward when you're supervising. It's their research, but I get to guide and reflect on it. So that's fun. So it's quite a challenging job, and it's an open-ended job, but that's the teaching side of it. And then I have to do my research as well. So it's lots of aspects to the job, but it's been going on. So I've been at the University of Chester since 2008, and if they promote me, they have to promote me into an admin job, and I don't know if I want that. So I'm staying at staying in a teaching heavy, research heavy, academic position rather than becoming a pen pusher who basically just has to spend his time doing admin. I have to do admin, of course. There's lots of admin, but not as much as if they promoted me, I'd have to just become a quality assurance person or a research coordinator role, and I'd rather gnaw my own head off than do that type of thing. So I've got to where I want to be, and I'm just going to try and keep doing it as long as they keep paying me. That's the idea anyway. I'm drinking mead when I can. So yeah, the other thing. Okay, so one thing, going back to someone earlier said about talk more about Anglo-Saxons. The thing is, most of my research is on early medieval Britain. It's not really about Vikings. And I spent the first year on this app almost avidly avoiding talking about Vikings and stuff because I talked about it a bit, but I wanted to talk about my death, mortuary archaeology, and my early medieval Britain archaeology. But I'm afraid Vikings are the poster boys and girls of the early Middle Ages. They're the way in. They're the way in that people have heard of and can relate to. So, someone was an undergraduate at Nottingham. Hooray! I know people at Nottingham, of course. Yes, nice department, nice people, both in Viking studies, Christina Lee and Judy Jesh and people like that, but also on the archaeology side too. Yes, there's lots of good people, Chris Lovelock and those lot. Yeah. where was I going with this? Yeah, but Vikings. I think I came up with that Modern Warrior video and responding to that, and then I've done one about I've responded to the Bahari video. Gosh, people get very defensive about their big favourite creators, don't they? I mean, I wasn't criticising him at all, and people were still in my comments going, "Stay in your lane." I don't know. I put on an accent there. I don't know why I put on that accent, but I got this sense of people getting very defensive that I was even talking about a subject that. I mean, Pari's a lovely guy, and he's doing some great videos. But of course, he's doing something I would never dream of doing, which is going so far and wide across the world, commenting on all sorts of things. I have to admire someone who does that, and he gets the follows for doing that, and he deserves them. But obviously, inevitably, he's going to touch on subjects that are a little on the edge of not his knowledge. But I have to admire someone who does that. But I mean, for me, pushing to the Viking mythology is as far as I can go. I do stay in my lane most of the times, and stay. Oh, Lloyd Lang, I met him once. Yeah, he had sideburns, didn't he, Penelope? Yes, big sideburns, very quiet Scottish guy. Yeah, sorry, just talking about lecturers from Nottingham University there. Oh, right, someone's on the Tolkien stuff. The other thing that I've got into trouble or infamy recently is supporting some of the big Tolkien creators, of course, for daring to respond to some of the faux outrage about Rings of Power. I mean, I don't, I know my Tolkien. I know my academic Tolkien. I know, but I'm not a nerd. I don't know every, which elf went here and in which year of the Second Age they went to the lavatory, and I don't know that kind of stuff. But I do know my mythology and I know the academic. I've read some of the academic work about Tolkien. But my point was I thought it was a good moment to wade in and give Don and all the others a bit of a support, because they were clearly getting literally deluged by rage at the Rings of Power trailers and show representation of people of colour that I felt, because I did see people on their comments sort of saying, well, the Anglo-Saxons were all white and the Vikings were all white, so Tolkien could have never even conceptualised. He would have never have approved of a Lenny Henry appearing in it. I mean, it's in the realms of it's so laughable, and yet clearly a lot of people are very angry about this stuff. So I felt I had to say something there. So yeah, maybe I'll do more about the academic stuff behind Tolkien once I finish with The Mandalorian. So we shall see how that goes. But at the moment I'm sticking on my actual early medieval stuff. Oh, hello, Lizzie Von Doolittle. Hello. Fantastic. I shall look into the Time Team stuff. And I rely on you guys, including Lizzie, who's been very good at reminding me of things that are happening in popular culture, because I'm doing my narrow research. Did you know about this is going on? And so it's great you guys keep me up to date with all the things that are going on. I will do some more Tolkien stuff, because there's a lot of archaeologists have talked about the archaeology in Middle Earth, because Tolkien at one level didn't have a clue about archaeology. At another level, he did have a basic knowledge of Anglo-Saxon archaeology as it was in the 30s to 50s. And so some of those, it's long been discussed how some of those elements did enter his Middle Earth, particularly like the Barrow Downs with the and his description was clearly inspired by, at least partly, the Sutton Hoo Mound 1 treasure. There's other points. And of course, the Peter Jackson version of the universe created whole new archaeologies, because things that never were visualized in the books, or even in the notes of the books, and all the other masses of worlds of Middle Earth that Christopher Tolkien put together. But the film had to represent things. And so for me, that's a whole archaeological world, a material world that's been constructed for TV. And of course, they worked with Alan Lee, John Howe, and all these artists, to do that. So these are all different archaeologies of Middle Earth. Tolkien's vision, what Tolkien actually, put in, visualized himself, but also what various other artists and film producers and design teams have created. So it's all very, very fun, really. So I do want to do more on the archaeology of Middle Earth, but no, it's true. The real life art, yes, it's not. I mean, the problem is that you get into these. The problem is it's a bit of a trap, a bit of a game. Is if you start talking about it in the wrong way, you start getting, everyone wants to talk, and this is all the responses when I've done things about Anglo-Saxon England as well as Viking Scandinavia. People want a numbers game. Well, how many people do you think there were? It's like the dwarves asking Gandalf actually about, well, how many dragons have you slayed? Come on, give us a number. It's like, how do we know exactly what anyone looked like and exactly their skin tone and composition? It's like arguing about bloody dreadlocks or not. Yes, right, let's say one Viking may have had a dreadlock, if that makes people happy. But at the end of the day, we have lots of evidence that they had other ways of grooming their hair. So, it's like the thing, it's the same thing with skin tone. And we know the Vikings had massive trading networks. We can't snapshot Hedeby from sort of 980 and say there were X number of people of colour at this settlement at this one point. It's a nonsense. We can't do that. But, people are absolutely adamant that you're spinning false narratives if you say anything about that topic. There's such passion and anger. And you know where that comes from? It comes from our own obsessions and our own prejudices. But I think it is important we accept that there was a complex, far-reaching trade networks which would have brought people to Scandinavia as much as people going away. Same for Anglo-Saxon England. So there was never a time when there was a pure of anything in this period at all. It's fantasy. Lots of good points. Hi, Nish. Yes, my Welsh friends here. Thank you. And good evening to you. Yes. So, yes, and there's more significant things than skin colour to worry about with all of these representations. I haven't seen The Green Knight. I have seen Vikings Valhalla, this latest TV show, and I did one post about it, and I will do some more about that because. I want to talk about the funerals because I love the funerals in these TV shows because none of them are right. None of them match with archaeology. But what is great about them is that suddenly, within a decade, we've got more TV representations of early medieval funerals than we ever had, in 100 years of the moving image, or 80, 90 years of the moving image. Hi, one medieval historian. Hello. It's. I just want to finish this point about the Viking TV show. So all of these comics, animes, TV shows, films. There's a new Northman film coming out, isn't there? It doesn't matter how. For me, I don't really. I'm just an observer. I like them to be wrong. I like them to be ludicrous. At one level, not always. Some of the things I'm pulling my hair out about, but other things are really good because this is part of a journey that we're going on, and that I know that we're going to be in 50 years' time. Someone's going to make a career out of writing books critiquing all this stuff. So it's all grist to the mill, so to say. But seriously, the other point is that the more we have of these, the more we have different Viking ages represented on TV. If we're trapped with only The Last Kingdom or only with Vikings Valhalla, God forbid, we're stuck. But the fact there's such an enthusiasm means that no single vision is going to hold authority. Like, it's not going to be like the days when Kirk Douglas's 1958 Vikings film shaped a generation's perception are over. We're going to have so many Viking ages, in the same way we have so many Spider-Men. Too many Spider-Men. There's never going to be a single Spider-Man. People are, and that is a healthy position, I think. At least that's my default healthy position. Asterix, yes. Stick with Asterix. I'm gonna ask this question of Brown Shinobi. What exactly was the reason for the Vikings raiding other lands? I guess I never wondered why. Well, archaeologists have spent 150 years. It's like the end of Rome. There's probably more answers than there are scholars, or as many answers as there are scholars. I mean, the latest, and the ideas, if I may say, the more recent ideas for why the Vikings raided are getting more, not less ridiculous. They are getting, to use my favourite Dad's Army phrase, if anyone's seen the British comedy Dad's Army, into the realms of fantasy. We have the technological, their boats got better so they could do it argument, which doesn't really work. We have the Norse people were just so innately violent, or so innately fertile, there was no land left. They all had to go elsewhere, and the only way to do it was raiding, or they were just so innately violent, driven on by a pagan zeal to die and go to Valhalla, that they were almost suicidal in their violence. Again, we have those old-fashioned ideas, and we have the ideas of economic, social, political mix, with their push and pull factors. Yeah, you could get treasure, you could get slaves, you could get furs, you could get salt, amber. There's a range of other trading products in areas outside Scandinavia they may have been raiding and trading with in dynamic interplay to acquire. And also, we have the possible political motives of, you could it's not what you bring back, it's what you can do with what you bring back, and what it allows you to rise in your hierarchy, compete. And so this is where, if I may dare to say it, the original TV show Vikings from 2013, though obviously a lot of the plot is nonsense, I mean literally nonsense, the idea of this, there is a land to the west, I've never heard of such a thing, can't exist. Of course they knew that England was, for crying out loud. They've been trading with Francia and Anglo-Saxon England for a century and a half. Everyone knew where these lands were. Okay? There's lots of nonsense in that TV rendition, but there's also a core truth. And the core truth is most of the people who go on the raid, you never work out their motives. The lead characters are doing it for a range of personal, political, economic motives. And it probably was a mixture of factors. And so I think the TV show Vikings, if you haven't watched it, go watch the original series. It's the original first series is the most ethnographic. It tries to be pseudo-historical in a way. Simplified, naive, but it does have a core truth. This idea that it was a complex set of motives, and individual egotism, I think, is part of that. Individual. So I think that's my simple answer if you wanted one. So I think there's a few issues there we can. So I'm just checking out what other people have said in response to that. Oh, thank you for loving my content. I'll keep going with it. Thank you. And it was there, wanderlust and profit. I mean, I think one of the ideas that I like is Steve Ashby's, is the idea that the objects, the things you gain from plundering, the material objects, you could tell stories about them. So it's not just, you don't go, I ripped up this book cover from a salter, but you can tell the story of how you got it, where it's from. You can embellish those stories, and those stories have social and symbolic capital. You can buy a wife with it, or you can buy you can negotiate freedom with it. You can acquire slaves with it. You can acquire land with it. But you can also tell stories with it. These objects would have been famed objects, and that it's not the same as going. I went on a business trip to Germany, and I came back and I bought something in the airport. Bought some perfume for you, dear. I think there's a bit more of a cachet to an object that is unique, and you can actually tell a story of acquiring something that no one else has. Yeah, complex political landscapes, petty kings. Yeah, Real Ivar's got it. A lot of internal politics, and it builds on each other. Yes, I think lots of ideas. Oh my God, Laura, hello, death and burial person. Hello, how are you? Good to see you here. One of my former students has joined, so that's wow. Hi there. Yes, no, there's lots of complex reasons, I think. I think land was probably not follower of Yggdrasil's. Land, actually wanting to acquire land, was a way, to actually settle abroad, was perhaps a secondary or tertiary motive. You've got to remember that may have come 2 generations after the first raiding, 3 generations after the first raiding in the Baltic from the 750s. And if you think of trading connections through Reba is now dated back to AD 700. So, think of settlement of Iceland and settlement of the Northern Isles. That's all a 9th century. That's already 100 years later. So I really can't see that this land is so crap, we have to go and get land elsewhere. I think that's perhaps the most deceptive I don't think that's the least convincing for the start of the raids, and maybe that came in later as a motive. But, you know, even in the Viking Age itself, I bet people were making up justifications for why they did things while they were still doing it, just as you see commentators making up rationales for why people do things today within years, months, let alone decades of them starting doing it. So I suspect part of the answer is people were doing it for a range of reasons, and they rapidly, if they didn't have a good reason, and it, you know, or it went better than they thought, and they better have a darn good justification for why they were so visionary, they made shit up. And so I think a lot of the 13th century stories of why people went raiding are very much hindsight justifications for things they probably, yeah, I mean the sagas would have it. The Norse settlers in Iceland were fleeing taxation and tyranny, and you know, sounds nice, it sounds easy, and that's probably part of the picture. I'm not denying it, but really, all of them, or were they just so obnoxious themselves? People kicked them out, and were some people actually looking for other opportunities? And you know, there may have been other things going on. Yeah, and of course, they were never going anywhere they didn't know about before. No one does. Well, very few people do. I mean, someone has to be the first, and you know, think of Polynesians, you know, and there's always, you know, there are, you know, the excitement of the Viking Age is the idea of people going where no man has gone before, or no woman has gone before, you know, that kind of Star Trek Final Frontier, you know, being the first settlers really attracts people, appeals to people. But you know, the accounts of North America, you know, Vinland, you know, it does capture the imagination, but in most cases, people go places where other people have gone before, and if they think they've gone there before, but they usually find that someone else is already there, or someone who already has had the idea. I mean, now we've got evidence from the Pharaohs now looking like either Norse people got there 100, 150 years earlier, or probably monks did from Scotland and Ireland, and the Norse sort of piggybacked on the idea of the Pharaohs because it's such an important pivot in the North Atlantic, you know, because there were already people there, you know. So, and the same with Iceland. There's a whole debate about, well, were the Norse really the first people in Iceland, or were there a few monks there banging around, you know, from the 800s, early 800s or late 700s? Yeah, and they were going via Scotland and Ireland, of course. Oh, death studies. Now, I have to talk about death studies, if I may, because Laura obviously joined and said hello, and she was one of my death and burial students, and this gentleman here is saying that he once did an interdisciplinary degree about death studies. I did my master's degree was at Reading University of Reading, with Dr. Heinrich Herke and Dr. Bob Chapman, as they were then, and became Professor Bob Chapman. But also we got taught by Professor Tony Walter, who's one of the leading figures in death studies from sociology at Reading, and then went to Bath and founded the Centre for Death and Society at Bath. So I've always been, and part of my PhD was on the sociology and anthropology of death as well. To understand my archaeological evidence, I did a lot of wider reading on history, sociology and anthropology of death, material that's still widely disparaged and dismissed and ignored by archaeologists to their so death is a theme. It's an important theme for all of us, of course, and it's a theme that connects the past and the present, and one that I think we shouldn't shy away from. And this is where I have a problem with archaeologists, because at one level we've got one of the most fascinating themes we can really engage people with there, you know, about human mortality, gruesome ways people die, boring ways in which people die, common or garden ways, horrible, slow ways people die. But we also get to see how people deal with that and how they respond to that, and the practices that they pursue to honour the dead. So I think there is a lot of really interesting themes there that connect past and present and make the archaeological record, even if it's the lives and deaths of people living thousands and thousands of years ago, that from different parts of the world that we don't have any ancestral connection with, we can still find a connection. We can still find an affinity because we know these people lived, suffered, lost others, and then had to go through that experience of mortality themselves. And I think that's something that we all share, and I think is one of the great things that we can bring to conversations today that is awkward. Because one thing that archaeology can do is touch on the delicate subject without the immediacy of recent loss. We're dealing with people who died hundreds of years ago. And sometimes that means we can talk about it in a graphic way. Sometimes we can talk about it in a funny way. We shouldn't be too po-faced about it, but equally, we have to deal with it, realizing that we are dealing with the remains of once living people, and they deserve our respect and care if we are disturbing their rest at all. And in most cases, we try to avoid it at every cost. There's a whole debate to be had there that I addressed early on when I was on TikTok, but no one's really asked me about it since. But archaeologists get a bad reputation for this, but we are, a very ethical discipline that does, in every context, we try to avoid disturbing human remains unless it's going to be destroyed by some other human activity in the present. Yeah, what's the procedure when a dig site is found until excavation begins? It's really complex, actually. It depends on who owns the land, why the site is being disturbed, why the excavation is taking place. And you actually do find a lot of the cases we try, in particularly say North America, the planning and development and building, they'll do anything they can to avoid disturbing burial sites, particularly indigenous sites, but also any site. In the UK, that matters too. We'll try and put in roads or development where it doesn't destroy sites that are known about. The problem with archaeology is we don't always know where the sites are in the first place. So there's this stupid game we have to play of people say, well, there's nothing known there. I said, that's probably because it's well preserved and hasn't been disturbed. So there's probably something really cool there that no one knows about yet. So we have to play this. It's a really complex process so often what you do is you put in evaluation trenches to see if there's what the nature of the archaeology is and make an estimate of what can be found. But the problem is things come up in development that the developers can't afford to fund the archaeological work for, and where there's no real expectation that that's going to be found. The great case of amazing discovery about 5-6 years ago in Norfolk of a waterlogged Middle Anglo-Saxon, in other words, Christian monastic burial ground with log coffins. And it's all preserved. And everyone was going, oh my God, this is so amazing. And then also people go, oh shite, this is going to cost millions to excavate. Because unlike most cemeteries, which are positioned in well-drained places, and all the organics has been long gone, there's no wood, they had all the wood coffins intact. So this was an amazing archaeological excavation, and fortunately, English Heritage stepped in and did the excavations and did the work without the developer having to pay because they had no money to do it. Yeah, I mean, burial evidence is such an important part of what we uncover, and without the people's graves, we lack their stories. And but we're not going. Yes, it was waterlogged, but we didn't have. When I say waterlogged, there was no fleshed human remains. It was all skeletons, but the wood had preserved. Different soils and different drainage creates different types of preservation. And with early medieval burials, we rarely have the wood preserved. No, it was on a floodplain. Because they were crazy Christians, they buried the dead on the floodplain. So for 1,000 years since, or 1,400 years since, it was being, seasonally flooded. The river sort of rose up and it was waterlogged. So the wood never dried out and it survived. And of course, in bogs, in proper bogs, acidic bogs, you do get the bog bodies preserved and the other organic remains preserved. So you do have this really rich level of preservation of all manner of different remains. But in this case, you simply had the wood preserved, which was amazing. It was cool. Again, TikTok doesn't allow me to link things in, but there is various news stories about it. I wish I could remember the name of the site. Like Must Farm, yes. As Louisa Shelby says, Must Farm is a Bronze Age settlement site that was also pretty amazing preservation. And the organic stuff can be some of the most amazing preserved funerary remains, and also some of the most gruesome. Very cold conditions, very hot and dry conditions, very boggy conditions where bacteria can't get at remains, such, ancient Egypt, mountaintops of Peru, the Iceman from the Chalcolithic of the Alps. These are the remains that captivate public public's imagination because we have the flesh. We can see the faces of dead people. Often we're left with just the bones, and often with many societies, they're cremating the dead or excarnating the dead. We don't have the faces of people or the integrity of the bodies. We don't tend to forget these were people too, and had So it's but that's what mortuary archaeology is so important. It's not to be, we can't just let these sites be destroyed. We have to excavate them for the future generations to know. But equally, if the site was never going to be disturbed, we have to have darn good reasons to investigate before, good justifications for doing the work we do. Because not only is it disturbing the dead, but it's darned expensive to do excavations. No one does it just on a whim anymore. Unlike 19th century barrow diggers who took a couple of labourers up onto the nearest ridge and dug some old mounds, some old tumuli, and showed off to friends the trinkets they found. Now we have to, it's a lot of work and it's a lot of justification. Yeah. And, we're never going to know the names of these individuals, but they're being remembered in a sense by our excavations. We're honouring the decisions made by past generations of how they dispose of the dead. And you may think it's never okay to disturb someone's grave, and that's a view. But you could say we're also doing a process of remembering by excavation. And I have to say, this is where archaeology is most poignant, is when we are excavating in a forensic context, in other words, as part of a criminal investigation. Because by finding those bodies, using archaeological techniques, and forensic investigations have benefited massively from archaeological expertise and research, whether it's in former Yugoslavia or whether it's individual clandestine investigations in others' murder cases. We are literally telling the stories that those people couldn't tell themselves because of the way their demise was chosen for them, to put it that way, without being too precise about it. So it is a very important and poignant thing to do. And we are not dissolving or destroying, we are salvaging the stories of past people, so that future generations, and this is why indigenous communities, say, for example, in the US, while there's been a long history of tension with archaeologists, equally archaeologists and indigenous communities see a lot of benefits, mutual benefits, in the scientific investigation of burial sites where absolutely necessary, because for many of these groups their history has been taken from them, and the archaeology is a key way, a main way, sometimes the only direct way to re-access their stories. So digging the dead isn't always wrong, and in some cases it's absolutely necessary. But this is why you can't respond in a soundbite on the internet to people who go, archaeologists, you're all ghouls, or archaeologists, because you need some education to understand the complex, different, varied ways in which archaeology works in the contemporary world. No, I haven't heard of an Italian guy searching for the Holy Grail in Iceland, but why not? Because the Holy Grail is everywhere. The Holy Grail is in the ruined abbey just down the road from where I live as well. Everywhere is the Holy Bloody Grail. So, there's probably, like in Indiana Jones and Last Great Crusade, there's probably about 500 of them, so there's all manner of Holy Grail. So that hardly surprised me. He has theories that the Knights Templar with Snorri Sturluson, oh, right, okay, yeah, of course he did. Good luck to him. Usually it's Americans and Brits going into other people's countries and finding the Holy Grail, and it's an extension of colonial 19th century practice. That's why archaeologists criticise it so much. Not because pseudo-archaeology is actually another form of archaeology. That's why we call it pseudo-archaeology. We're aware of our guilty history, our colonial legacies, and we're aware that people doing this for TV or doing this for book sales are basically peddling the same mode of investigation that happened in the 19th century, and that's why we hate it so much. We think it's so vile and unethical and often deeply racist, because you're doing the same thing. You're just rocking up in other people's countries and trying to solve mysteries. With the word mysteries to anyone but you, until you deemed it was a mystery to be solved because you hadn't heard about it before. Or am I being too cutting? But you know what I mean. Oh yeah, that's a really good question from user 407 916 157 0502. Question: King Alfred has different characters in Vikings and the Last Kingdom. Which is more accurate? Do you know what? Who blooming knows? I'll tell you what I think. Okay, here goes. Right, this is. I hate the Last Kingdom, but I thought Alfred was all right. He was a real nasty piece of work in it, and he's a real determined, pious piece of pompous pratishness. So yeah, I would say in terms of the one thing I liked more about The Last Kingdom than anything else, than any other TV show, was the portrayal of Alfred. His wife got right up my nose, and still does in the season 5 I've just started watching. But I would say Alfred is far, far better in The Last Kingdom than in Vikings. I would say fight me on it, but there's nothing to really fight about because we don't know any of the details. But I liked it. I liked it. I thought it was better. Oh, a user from New York, fantastic. Yes, there's a lot of constructive dialogues across the world, but it's so easily scuppered by people who would misrepresent indigenous communities or misrepresent archaeologists. Those good relations can be just literally blown apart with bad faith actors and ridiculous polemics that happen. So yeah, a lot of goodwill. A lot of goodwill is needed between archaeologists and local communities, whether they're indigenous or otherwise. Better or more accurate, says user 4079161570502. Both. Let's say both. Last Kingdom's Alfred is better and more accurate. It's based on evidence I've just made up in my own head in my own mead cup. Yeah, I'll stay with that. I don't know. I haven't got anything else. They gave him the Fuller brooch to wear. I did a blog post about Alfred's Fuller brooch in The Last Kingdom, and they put the silver Fuller brooch on him, which is a real artifact. So they did a replica. They put the replica object on him. So I think they put more attention into archaeological accuracy with The Last Kingdom's King Alfred than they did with the Joker in the Vikings TV show. Fantastic. Lots of lovely questions, and I've got more mead. I said I'd go on for an hour, but I've already gone on for an hour and 26 minutes. But I've told you a little bit about my teaching. I've told you a little about. I haven't really told you about my future research. I'll do that for another live. I'll tell you about what I'm up to in the future in another live, I think, if that's okay. I've told you about why I'm doing this. I've answered your questions. I'll have a script back to see if there's any other questions. Rune stones, any found in GB? And if so, how many? God, the real Ivor's got me. He knows he's got right on the question, right on the, yeah, good question. Okay, so rune stones, as in runic inscribed stones. Yes. Anglo-Saxons had rune stones long before the Vikings. No, well, not exactly. The major tradition of runic inscribed stones from Scandinavia, which mainly dates from the end of the 9th through the 10th into the 11th century. Yeah, we have earlier ones. Yeah, I know. We have earlier ones from the migration period and a few from the Vendel period and a few from the 9th century. But most rune stones in Scandinavia, memorial inscribed stones, are Christian conversion period and after, sort of late 10th, 11th and early 12th, right? Most of the runic inscriptions from Anglo-Saxon England, Christian ones, are 8th, 9th, early 9th. So we have that tradition comes from Anglo-Saxon England, among other places, but mainly from Anglo-Saxon England. So actually, people forget that. People think of it the other way around. No, the Anglo-Saxon Christian Anglo-Saxons were in runic inscribing on stone before the Vikings did it commonly, although there are a few early rune stones, as I said. So, and we have some really cool examples. You may have heard of the Ruthwell cross from Dumfries in Galloway, which has a runic inscription in Old English. We have the Urswick cross, a cross slab from Cumbria. I can't give you a figure off the top of my head, but we have at least 2-3 dozen runic inscribed stones of Old English. And then we have artifacts as well, runes on artifacts and other objects. So yeah, runes are an Anglo-Saxon, they're a Germanic thing, and we have them in Anglo-Saxon context too, as well as Scandinavian context. But the memorial tradition of stone inscribed rune stones, actually, yeah, we've got examples from Anglo-Saxon England. That's all well and good. Is this Joseph 90? That's all. You can tell yes. Oh, I love these kind of comments. That's all well and good. But seriously, where do you stand on the subject of fairies? Where don't I stand on the subject of fairies? I mean, I have absolutely zero knowledge and expertise on the folklore or interaction with fairies. So as this is TikTok, I will now pronounce expert knowledge on everything. Fairies. I mean, fairy folk. What can one say? What can I say? Nothing. I have absolutely no opinion. I can't even be forced at gunpoint to have an opinion on fairies. Uh, um, Fairy cakes I have consumed on occasion. Does that count? Is that cannibalism of sorts? No, I don't think so. It is a nice glass claw beaker. Yeah, replica 6th century. Got all these separate little claws. I think it looks like they're something that H.P. Lovecraft would have imagined some Cthulhuid beast looked like. But it originally comes from late Roman vessels where they had dolphins on the sides. So it's actually a maritime theme. So the dolphins are jumping out of the water. But by the 6th century, they just like random little claws. That's why they're called glass claw beakers. But all that you can see, the mead is collected in the different heights. So it's very entertaining and very fun to drink from. Yeah, I agree with you about Alfred. I think I agree with you. Did you know that Gerard Butler, he is 52? Yeah, but that is so true. Gerard Butler is 52. You know, he's older than me and obviously not as good looking as me. What more can I say? Yes, Sean's got it right about Christian Celtic inscribed stones. Actually, yeah, I can see that. Fairy Cake Cannibals. I think it was a band, wasn't it? Was that Fine Young Cannibals? But anyway, either way, they drive me crazy like no one else. I'm sure I've missed really insightful comments here that I've missed. I'm studying collaborative circles of mid 1800s Persian missionaries. Flipping heck, that sounds cool. The thing about TikTok and so many other, it's everyone's got a knowledge of stuff that I don't, and I'm learning. It has to be said, and one of the things on this celebratory 14,000 followers is I've learned so much shit from other people on this app, other creators and comments. I'm not I'm here, I'm an educator, but at the end of the day, it's a two-way street, isn't it? And I'm learning a lot of stuff. I'm learning that I've now somehow admitted. I'm sure that a section of this will be recorded and denounced in videos across TikTok that I eat fairies as a cannibal or something. And this will be a controversy. It'll last for weeks, and I'll have to do tearful confessional videos about my it was really only a cake. I never meant to harm any fairies, and I didn't want to harm anyone that thinks fairies are not cakes, that I might have eaten their relatives if they feel they're descendants of fairies. I just want to say I'm sorry. Can I just say I'm sorry for everything, including anyone that finds with fairies in any way? Just sorry, just apologies. Just let me say that for now. Yes, new Pictic symbol stones have been found. Rocking. Yes, I saw that in the news, but I haven't done a video about it. Did the Saxons have similar utensils to the Norse, a wooden food container and a lid? Yeah, you know what? Again, the problem with wooden preservation is that most containers and objects were probably made of wood or basketry, and we hardly have any of it surviving. But we have more ceramics from the Anglo-Saxons. We have more Anglo-Saxon ceramics. There's a whole story I can tell you about ceramics, but I bet ceramics are only part of the picture. So I would imagine, yes, they did. We did have similar utensils. Everyone just used a knife. Most Anglo-Saxon graves, when they were furnishing the dead, had a knife. Everyone had a knife. So a knife was a stand. You'd use a knife for, stabbing the eyes out of your opponents as well as eating your food, cutting up an apple. Knives are everywhere. There's a knife culture, a knife culture ridden with knives. Do you know, I haven't done, I know, if you know Steph on the app, Steph Archaeodeath, she's doing a PhD at Durham, or she's starting a PhD on the Arabian Peninsula archaeology. So you should definitely follow her if you don't already. But I don't know anything about Arabian Peninsula archaeology. The closest thing I did is I used to edit. This is just a random anecdote. I used to edit a journal called the Archaeological Journal, and I got a submission to the journal by an Iranian scientist who'd been studying woodlice in Saudi Arabia. And I think it was he thought the journal was the Arthropod journal, anyway. And he just thought it was, I found it a very interesting read, all about woodlice from Saudi Arabia. But I had to politely explain to him that while woodlice from Saudi Arabia are a worthy topic of for him as an Iranian scientist to be researching, my journal on focusing on the archaeology of the British Isles was not the best place for it to be published. And he took it well. So that's the closest I've ever come to Saudi stuff, I'm afraid. Cottingley Fairies. I know Cottingley very well, actually. And I know some fairies from there, but not from 1917. Real Ivor's asking, what are the biggest differences and biggest similarities? Now, this is really interesting because the TV shows want to make out that every Anglo-Saxon spoke with a received pronunciation. I am an actor. I am an Anglo-Saxon king. Bring my liege. The Vikings have invaded. Send them away. You know, they talk like this all the time. They'd speak like some kind of like Shakespearean actor, you know. And the Vikings are all, I speak with this strange kind of accent that kind of sits in the middle of anywhere and sounds like Swedish chef. And it's like, oh. But also with the material culture. So where I'm going with this is that the TV show wants to portray people as different. They want to show ethnic groups with different weapons, different armor, different. And to do that, they've really made, if there's, whatever people think about the way they portray Norsemen, or Norse people, the way they portray the Anglo-Saxons is a crime against humanity, really. I mean, the armour is so shite. The Anglo-Saxons are portrayed as they've never been in a battle before. You know, they say, oh, look, there are people, let's just run at them going, argh! You know, it's so rubbish. Actually, to my point where I'm going this, I think material culture-wise, I think you would be hard-pressed to see the difference, you know, between many of these Northern European communities. The clothing, slightly different styles of female dress, slightly different styles of male dress. But I think, honestly, on the whole, I think most people would have looked very similar, apart from the toffs, who would have just been looking silly most of the time. That's human history, isn't it? Posh people look ridiculous, you know, and everyone else just tries to get through with what they've got available. I'm sorry about the slander against the Arabian woodlouse. I shall stop it at once. I apologise. Can I just apologise to all people who know and believe in fairies and don't believe they should be cannibalised, and also all people whose best friends are Arabian woodlice, because I don't want any hate going out there to arthropods, not just in Arabia but anywhere. You know, I'm thinking particularly of Welsh woodlice. I have a lot of interaction with Welsh woodlice. They're lovely creatures. Some of my best friends are Welsh woodlice, and I don't want any hate, please. Thank you. You can't have that, or I'll be doing apologies for the rest of my TikTok career, which will probably last only another week. What else can we do with this? Yes, the Romans are always English accents, aren't they? Who are these Macedonians? Oh, we're from kind of a Hollywood Irish accent. You know, was it Val Kilmer? Bless him, bless his cotton socks. Hello, Vampire Cadet. Hi, love your videos. God, there's some really cool people on here that I know do some great content. Yes, I knew that Conan Doyle was fooled into believing in fairies, or in the fairy scandal. Oh, hello, Jenny. Oh, there's all sorts of nice people here I know from yeah. You know what's really funny is that there's some really, really cool stuff without knowing about from the early Middle Ages about mythologies of non-human beings, non-human entities, supernatural entities. And we don't know hardly anything about the details of them. Like we have like a skull from Reba carved with runic inscription to protect people against dwarfs. And it looks like this piece of skull, human skull, has been pierced for suspension. So someone was wearing a piece of human skull with an inscription. I can't remember the exact inscription saying "Protect me from the dwarves." And we haven't got one or two Anglo-Saxon runic inscriptions on objects saying about dwarves, as if dwarves would be a malign spirit that would cause you harm, like pixies or something. But we don't, we have no idea what people would have thought dwarves looked like, what they would have thought dwarves, did, other than, and even in terms of height, scale, appearance, what do people think of? Yes, I do like the old war films where the Germans have the very English accents, but with a slight German twang. I mean, I think that the English are the bad guys in almost every film, so that's what my other backup role is. I could do as a if this career falls flat, I've got various other backup options, but I thought I could do older evil guy sitting on chair going kill them all, or something like that. It doesn't matter what film, whether it's set in the 9th century or the 20th century. I could do that role. That's why I see it going for my career. Is if the academic thing sort of wraps up in an unceremonious flurry of woodlouse hate and mead consumption, then I can always turn to the voiceover actor for doing sort of various baddies in video games or something. Those kind of intro, what do they call those bits? Those intro bits to video games where people sort of give you the actual real good graphics that you think you're actually buying, and then before you go into the Pac-Man style actual game, and you have a little sort of narrative, and I could do a voiceover game. Who are these people who think they have a right? Send out our legions, or something like that. I could do that kind of thing. That's my backup role, really. Backup option. We've all got to have a backup option. Oh, the Nysa in Denmark. Yes, trickster gnomes. Isle of Man has its pixies, but they're real shite, apparently. You've got to be careful of those Isle of Man pixies. I'll tell you one thing I do believe about fairies. I do believe in the power of the fairy bridge on the road to Douglas on the Isle of Man. There's this whole bridge, because they have the TT races and people die horribly for driving around the island on motorbikes too fast every year. There's a real, and also because tourists buy into it, a lot of bikers and general tourists do leave items at this fairy bridge to appease the fairies, appease the pixies, sorry. And there's all sorts of shit there. I mean, people are literally, hundreds of people a year leaving flowers, motorbike helmets, shirts, remembering dead people, hoping, offerings to hope for the best for the living people. It's a really weird. Google the fairy bridge from the Isle of Man. And of course, it's all for tourists, but it's also, that doesn't mean it's not sincere, because it is part of a real evolving tradition. So yeah, fairies are not real in the real sense, or are they? Yeah, but they are certainly real in the material practices of what we do in our landscape. Oh yeah. Well, this is the thing, isn't it? Is it pagan though? This is our offerings pagan, or is it all just modern? But leaving offerings, I mean, people do this on gravesites. Or go to any cemetery, people are leaving offerings. Is that pagan? Flowers. Putting a little toy by a children's grave, is that pagan, or is that just the fact that material culture allows people to connect in a way? I don't know. There's some interesting themes there that I think I like to discuss. It's human. It's what people do with material culture to connect either us with imagined otherworldly beings or with the souls of the dead. There's a whole, we live in a world of different realms and imaginations, and I think that's no bad thing, as long as we don't eat the fairies. See, I was going to be serious in this thing, and I've just gone all silly now, haven't I? But this is what happens, really. Thank you for sending me all these likes. I've got gifts and flowers and stuff. I've no idea how any of this works, so I appreciate it. That's all I can say. I'm very confused by this live dynamic, but I'm trying my best. Do you think leaving gifts and things could give this law more power? I mean, I think people are mad. Objects are emotive. Objects are the things that make things tangible and enduring. Who knows who will see the graffiti you leave on a tree? Love locks are another interesting modern dynamic of locking with the name of a loved one. And throwing away the key or taking away the key and leaving on a bridge, a little lock with the names of the people who are in love, were in love. Maybe I've seen love locks remembering their mothers. So it's the living and the dead. I think where I'm going with this is the object makes things tangible, makes things permanent. Even an ephemeral object, it leaves things linked, that thing, to the place, and allows you to remember and connect. So I think these objects I don't scoff these traditions. I think they're really interesting, and they show us something enduring about human nature, as I think Sean was saying about it. It's something that links us. I'm sure Anna has lots of opinions on that. That's true. Oh, the real Ivar just won't give up. I don't know anything about the Scythian tribe theory for the Aesir and the Vanir. Certainly the idea by the... I don't know. I know what you're getting at here. I haven't read up enough on that, though. I like the idea that there were... What I would say is that... Can I just say this about that the fact that at least by the 12th, 13th century, the gods are being explained in Eastern terms shows how Scandinavia was being drawn into this European world where the exotic and the wild was coming from the East. And Judy Jesh has done an important paper about this, looking at the references to shield maidens in 12th, 13th century sources, is that they're always foreign, suggesting that actually, this will piss off people, that actually from her expertise in the written sources, shield maidens are not Norse. They're always Amazons. They're from the East. They're basically Scandinavia is getting this influence of Scythian, Amazon via the Greeks, via the Christian sources, is getting this idea of Eastern women warriors coming into their mythology. Now, it doesn't mean it wasn't there before, but she's saying all our evidence is pointing to it all being Eastern. My point is, again, it makes the point there was no hermetically sealed Norse worldview, that there was all these exposure to ideas century after century coming in from the south, the west, the east. Yeah, Clootie whales are a really interesting phenomenon. God, we're going all over the show here. This is brilliant stuff. Clootie whales, I do want to address this because I teach about this. Clootie or clouty whales, I don't know how you say it, but yeah, this deposition, because it also affects ancient monuments. People are depositing things in ancient monuments, neo-pagans, but also people are scattering their ashes because it's a beauty site. And this creates a contamination issue, but it also brings up an important issue about why are we preserving these ancient monuments? Are they there for education? Are they there because people treat them as modern spiritual sites? Or are all of these things interleaving? They can be both. And we have some really good, positive, long-running relationships between pagan groups and archaeologists at sites like Avebury. And just down the road at Stonehenge, we have literally a 5-decade-long living nightmare of conflict and contestation between archaeological institutions, bodies, landowners, and various traveller and neo-pagan groups. And in Wales, we have really good relationships. Archaeologists have really good relationships with the Druids that use Bryn Celli D, for example. So every site has a different dynamic. It's really interesting. Let's read through the comments. Oh, really? Tobacco? Oh, you're in Canada, aren't you, improvised hominin? That would make sense, wouldn't it? Oh, am I geographically-izing you, if I remember rightly? Yeah. Oh no, really? Have they carved runes on the stones at Wayland Smithy? I didn't know that. I know that they've obviously a lot of things going on there, but I didn't know about the rune carve. Oh no, yeah, this was in the Telegraph. Oh yeah, some folkish heathens were up to no good there. Yes, I saw about that. I did see about that. Yeah. Yeah, that's really dodgy because I got into a bit of a online argument with some interesting characters about that because without probably not best place to discuss it here, but Wayland Smithy, of course, is a Neolithic chamber tomb on the Berkshire Ridgeway, now in Oxfordshire, but historically Berkshire, I believe. And it dates to the 35th and 34th century BC, so kind of old, right? But it has this place name, Wayland Smithy, which I could talk a lot about. But that, because of that place name, it's now used by a range of neo-pagan groups, but including heathen groups. And some of them at least have, should we say, less than savoury views on other matters. And so there was a bit of a discussion about, what do we do about this? You know, you can't stop people accessing the site, but what can we do when it has that place name? Well, my solution, and I put this in my Archaeodeath blog if you're interested, is it would help if, as heritage practitioners, as archaeologists, we didn't have on the heritage board misinformation that says this is named after the pagan Germanic god Wayland, which is toss. I mean, there's so much problems there. Yes, Wayland is a figure from Germanic legend and Norse mythology, from the, you know, the Lay of Volander from the Poetic Edda, for example, and from Theodric Saga. But we don't have any idea that he was a god. But of course, people are now seeing this ancient monument as an ancient Saxon temple, of which there's no archaeological evidence or historical evidence at all, but based on a place name that's first recorded in the 10th century, you know, sort of 3.5 centuries after Christian conversion, so, or 2.5 centuries. So yeah, I mean, again, it comes down to the points of where are our responsibilities as academics and heritage people. You know, we can't stop people coming up with crazy ideas, but we can at least give them good information, to use a Jackson Crawford phrase. Give them good information with which to use and understand these sites. And if we leave this kind of misinformation out there from old sources, then it can be a real problem for us. Yeah. I Jenny, this lead tomb from Notre Dame. Don't open it. God, don't open it. No, I'm doing silly. Yeah, it looks like a typical high status late medieval tomb. I'll have to read up on more information about that. Someone's asked me to do a TikTok about it. I promise, therefore, I vow here, I will not do another TikTok about woodlice or fairies. I will do one about the Notre Dame lead tomb. See what I can find out about it. I think the general advice I would give about visiting archaeological sites is don't screw around with them. Just leave them alone. You know, they get messed around enough by people visiting them. There's no reason you have to do anything to them. Don't even leave footsteps. Don't even leave crisp packets. Let alone feel the. I know some people find the unswerving urge to carve into everything. And, you know, but you don't really have to. It's not like a dog pissing on a tree. You don't have to leave a mark. You can just look at stuff, and most people do that. But it's frustrating when that happens, because, you know, these are places where you can't police them, and there's always going to be somebody doing something stupid at these sites. But it's best to leave them alone. Respect the past. Respect ancient monuments. Respect anything that's not yours, and respect things that are yours. You know, even mead. So, I have reached the end of my sanity and my mead. Well, my mead is ongoing, but I'll start ranting about rant. If I haven't ranted already, I'm certainly at the end of my capabilities for ranting. So I love all the comments. Thank you very much for this wonderful conversation, and I will do another one at some point. This was rather short notice because I reached 14,000, and I still don't understand what 14,000 means in terms of followers. I assume they're real people, and but I really appreciate all the support, and some of you I know are familiar faces who have left many comments and likes, and I appreciate, you know, that very much. But whether you're new to me or you're a diehard Archaeodeathling, I want to thank you and good night for and you know, keep on TikToking and when time and sleep patterns allow, and I shall give you some more videos: lead coffins, rune stones, Vikings, Anglo-Saxons. I'll pack it all in, I promise. I've got a whole host of them still ready to roll, ready to rock. And thank you. I absolutely love my comment page. Thank you very much. So for that, from me, from Archaeodeath, Good evening.
If you've enjoyed this Archaeodeath video, why not check out the Archaeodeath blog at howardwilliamsblog.wordpress.com.